And now we move on to the second event, which is the session organized by Edmundo and chaired by Jim and Edmundo. So, Jim, you have some extra time, but I leave it in your hands.
Okay, thank you very much. And so in this session, let me talk a little bit about the session. We are going to have the idea of the session is to bring together people who are doing large measurements and security and TOE also. So it's a lot of things, let's say, mixed together. And that's the, so first of all, I'd like to thank Jim for allowing co-chairing the session. Appreciate very much. And so he's gonna help me a lot with the questions for the attendees. And before asking the speakers to introduce themselves, I'd like to mention two things. First, that our session would have 4 papers, and I'd like to, Philippe Ozaski was the author of the other technical paper, and unfortunately he was not responding since March, and we didn't know what was happening. And then just very recently we learned that he was in an accident. He was hit by a car and has been in the hospital since March. So I think we would all like to wish him a quick recovery and to be back to us. Fortunately, he's doing much better, and he was able to type with 2 fingers in the computer and send me some information. So we all wish him good health. And second, I'd like to the whole session is the whole session. I mean, the whole conference is also in honor of Mario Gerla, and Mario is, as we all know, has a enormous ability to bring people together, networking, and he was always happy. So besides, of course, the qualities of excellent researcher that we all know, but he has this special ability of bring people together, always happy. This is the way I think Mario would welcome all of you for the session. So with the 2 drinks and this very nice smile and lively discussion. So Mario, as we all know, will be with us forever. So it's very nice to have the memories of you all like that, very happy, always enjoying all of us and bring people together. So thank you very much. So okay, so now I'd like to ask for the speakers who will be answer the question to introduce themselves, and probably to give just some order here. I start with paper of implications of multimodality of user perceived page load time. Can you authors introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, good afternoon. I'm Flavia Salutari and I'm a PhD student from Telecom Paris. My PhD research focus is on internet measurements and mostly on the analysis and prediction of web users' quality of experience.
Thank you. So let's go for the other paper, identifying common periodicities in mobile service demands with spectral analysis. So could you please?
Yeah, sure. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marco Fiore. I'm a research associate professor at India Networks Institute in Madrid. And actually, I recently incorporated India Networks, leading again Italy for the second time. Yeah, I mean, my research interests are the interface of, I would say, data science and mobile networks. And talk today, I mean, the talk that pertains to the paper that was accepted at the conference is about trying to understand and cluster time series of demands generated by different mobile services.
Thank you, Marco. And the last paper, the other paper is with Sensing the Noise, Uncovering Communities in Darknet Traffic. So could you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Francesca Soro and I'm a second year PhD student at Politecnico di Torino. And my research interests are mostly on network monitoring and machine learning application for anomaly detection in cybersecurity.
Thank you very much. And I'll be open for the audience. If not, we don't have any questions. Jim and I are going to start asking some questions until we hit up the audience. So please remember that you'll be freely asking questions. So let me start with the question for Marco. And your paper, let's say Netflix and YouTube have very different patterns, like in table 2 of your paper. So did you expect that? Do you believe that patterns would change according, let's say, for using other kind of devices, not mobile devices, but at home? So could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the question, which is, of course, a fairly difficult question because we're moving somehow away from the technical domain and going more towards probably even sociology or demographics, because the reasons that drive the demand for specific services those are pertain to the domain of human habits. So somehow there are dynamics there that are not technical. So as an engineer, it's not always easy to understand them. So what I can propose are speculations. We don't have any evidence that this is actually what is driving the mobile service demands, but based on what we saw, not just in this paper, but a bunch of other works that we did on the same data, is that there's a profound diversity in the demands generated by different mobile services, and although we can identify similarities across some services as we do in this paper, and especially services that somehow belong to the same class, which is natural, or are provided by the same provider, which is also understandable. This heterogeneity is pretty evident, and the causes for that. Generally speaking, this is very much related, as an example, to land use. So different areas of a city that are characterized by different types of land use, like residential or commercial, or areas that are more dedicated to entertainment and leisure. Those drive a lot the kind of use of mobile services. So in this specific paper, we analyzed the time series. So we use this geographical dimension because we aggregate over space. But analyzing over space, you see this kind of geographical, let's say, land use driving the demands. And on the time dimension that we are more focused on in this paper, this is a bit more difficult. I mean, some patterns you can understand. You can understand probably why adult traffic has a very peculiar dynamics over time. Netflix it's unique because, in my opinion, again, it's a speculation, but it's a very, very unique service when you look at mobile devices. So we are capturing mobile devices, we're capturing what happens in the cellular network. So people who use Netflix in the cellular network with the, their cellular rates, there's not a lot of people who does that, first of all, so the traffic is not huge. And they tend to have a very specific pattern because you don't consume Netflix in the same way you consume it. But of course, I understand that I could go on in a sense that I could speculate for hours. But truth is that actually I'm also working with the sociologists in order to understand better these kind of things, again, because we move a little bit away from the technical domain. So I'm sorry that the question cannot be answered by an engineer.
No, it's interesting that the whole approach. So we continue that. But we have two questions. But I will ask Jim to ask one question for the other paper. Can you, before going to the audience?
Okay, sure. So Flavia, I wanted to ask you a question about your paper. But first, I wanted to say I think that the focusing on QoE and that kind of work is it's a beautiful area to be working in, and sort of looking at the user experience as opposed to sort of strict hard numbers like, oh well, milliseconds is better than 25 milliseconds when a human wouldn't even achieve that, right? So you're really looking at the experience. I guess I wanted to ask you sort of almost a philosophical question, and it has to do with choosing as your user sort of your measure of user experience when you perceive a page is downloaded, say, as opposed to I got the information that I wanted out of the page and it's quicker. So, ads, for instance, I never look at ads, right? And so if that portion never loads, I'd still be 100% happy. And so when you think about experience, wondering, there's a lot of different measures you could have chosen. User perception of when the page is loaded.
So thank you for the question. Yes, the user perceived page load time is not directly related with the experience in the sense of happiness with satisfaction, but I was thinking, for instance, that in the last few years there is also this new GDPR banner which is appearing. For some people, this could be a segmenting factor for waiting for the moment in which he or she perceives the page to be loaded. It's really personal and tied to many different factors that are really different also to track and to measure. So it's a good question, but it's subjective, and so I think it's really different. It's really difficult because it depends on the person, on the experience, on some measurable and not measurable factor like the experience of the user, the expectations. There are several factors that we cannot take into account at the moment. And I hope in the future the scientific community will be able also to enable more the measurement of more factors.
Maybe just one quick follow-up, because then I know there are other questions. Do you think that the sort of the trimodal behavior is a function of the metric that you chose, or do you think that that would be also true for other QoE metrics, that sort of three-level behavior, three-level mixture?
I see. For this particular subjective metric, the UPLT, I think, is really tight in the way in which the metric is conceived. For other subjective metrics, I'm thinking of the 5-scale grade, so the MOS and the acceptance of the service. I think we cannot speak of multimodal. At least we can think of bimodality in this case. But for what concerns the UPLT instead, I really think that multimodality is tight in the way in which the metric is considered. So it's really peculiar of this subjective metric.
Thank you very much. But by the way, excellent work. I enjoyed pretty much reading and seeing the presentations. And just to, before we have already questions here, but just to balance, I'd like to ask a question for Francesca. When you did the experience, you analyze the data, is there anything you did not expect? Because sometimes you are doing the analyze data and said, wow, why is that happening? So what, in your opinion, if there is anything you didn't expect, it was because you analyzed Italy, Brazil, and anything that came up to you as not expected? That's
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, let's say most of the largest community we have found were kind of expected. And yeah, actually, since we are kind of elaborating on the concept of anomaly, starting from this work, this is like not an anomalous behavior anymore. So it's still noise, but we see it constantly. It's exactly a background radiation. What we were surprised by is, for instance, one of the communities we also shown in the presentation that is very small, and it was really sequential. So we were able to identify automatically the scan of an entire framework with no need of any manual tuning or diving into the data. And actually that was surprising because, as I said, it's kind of a preliminary work, and seeing that it's kind of promising.
very nice. Thank you. And let me go over the audience that let's see. I guess the first one, right, Jim, is Gustavo. Question here.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So I have a question for Marco. So do you have access to recent data? And if so, were you able to detect changes in traffic patterns during the quarantine? And also, how do you think that your work could be used in the current context? For example, we expect that some traffic patterns are changing, and how could this be used, for example, to identify social distancing or something like that?
Thanks very much, Gustavo, for the very good question. So, you know, of course, this is something that has come to our mind because nowadays, you know, I think COVID has generated an amount of research that no previous event on Earth has generated. And as a researcher, you know, you want to contribute to that. So basically, we are discussing with mobile network operators about the possibility of getting this data. So working on this. I fully agree that that would be very, very interesting. Understanding, you know, the changing patterns. I mean, even a very simple thing like understanding how much the usage of the cellular network in terms of, you know, volume of traffic has changed over the you know, lockdown period in Italy or France or other European countries, or now in, you know, US and Southern America. That would be extremely interesting. I mean, I think it's something that you know, it's a measure that of course operators have, but as a researcher, we'd like, you know, to see somehow become public. And then of course there's everything else, like about usage of individual services. Are some services being used more than others or not, and why it is so? Again, it's a question for sociologists. So plenty of interesting questions. We're still at the point where we're discussing the data access, which, you know, something it's always a bit critical and takes months to be sorted out. I'm aware actually of you know, a group of colleagues across Europe who are a bit ahead of me, at least, and my group. So they actually already started you know, gathering data, and it's a pan-European effort. There's people from Germany, France, Spain, probably UK, and this is going to be a, you know, joint effort to try to answer the kind of questions that you know, I guess you had in mind that was mentioned before. If we get data, we will join them. Let's see. But I think that you will get an answer, you know, soonish.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is a question to Flavia from Ananda Strait.
Okay, hi. My question is directed to Flavia. Web pages provide different types of services, right? Some are for news, others are for hosting videos. So you find in your work two main classes of pages. Some are unimodal and others are multimodal, right? So have you observed pages of similar services in each of the classes you found in the work?
Hi, thank you for the question. In the set of 100 pages we analyzed, we didn't look inside if in the set of pages if within the class of unimodal or in the class of multimodal there were similar services, but we didn't this, but could be interesting. I agree. We didn't this because of the way in which we derived this set of pages, which implicitly was extracting pages of different types, but the difference was not tied in the type of service, but in the similarity of the pages. So I agree that this could be really interesting to observe. And instead, what we did, we looked in if inside the same class there were similarities or correlations in terms of what we call complexity features, so number of objects, number of images, number of advertisements, and we found out the result, which I think is quite interesting, that the number of advertisements in multimodal pages is on average five times larger than multimodal one. So this was an indication of the type of content in the page, but was not telling much with respect to the service provided by the page. So this could be something interesting to look.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, guys, my network, it's with above 50% loss, so I had to disconnect from that and connect to the cell I'm using 4G. Yeah, those things happen. So is there any question in the audience?
This is Jim. I have a question I wanted to ask Francesca, if I could.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Francesca, I really appreciated the notion of sort of how you're forming communities around the notion of modularity, and I wanted to ask you how sensitive your results are to two things. One is that particular definition of using modularity to define community, and secondly, had this iterative algorithm where you're saying, oh well, you know, I'm going to keep creating a group until the net contribution actually goes negative. And so, how sensitive was it for the community that you formed? How sensitive were they to where you stopped? And I'm also curious if you tried other definitions of what a community might be.
So we started by just trying this classical definition of modularity, what we could appreciate was that it was kind of sensitive with the dimension of the traffic capture. So the more connected the nodes, so the larger the trace, the more connected the nodes, kind of the worse the results. This has a link with what I was saying before. So there are a lot of large communities that mostly perform always the same activity. So what we are trying now is to get rid of that, or okay, take them as granted, they're stable, and dive into the rarer phenomena by trying to build some other models and use other, like trying to structure a sort of backbone network, keeping only the interesting activities by making a sort of graph, model of graph. And so this may a bit go farther than the mere concept of modularity. This is what we are trying now.
I see. That may actually answer the other question I had, was why you went from a 5-week time series and then adopted this notion of a median week time series. Was that to sort of smooth things out and to avoid this sort of explosion of community?
Yeah, basically, like that, it is sensitive to the dimension. So the problem in general of this kind of algorithms is scalability. And in the paper, maybe the weakest part is the filtering. So the rationale between this backbone future work that we are trying to address now is exactly this one. So just focus on the most important phenomena and try to also get time frame, sort of time-related picture of these communities. So what happens in this bucket, what happens in the following bucket, how similar they are, and what we can filter out from one day or 1 hour to the other.
Great.
Do you have a time for one more question? I lost if the audience has questions or not, or is the end of the session, Marco?
Well, if you want to ask one more question, fine, but then we need to move on to Tony's keynote.
Sure. It's a very good question. It's for Flavia. In the introduction of your paper, you comment that you might expect that the UP-LT measurement via mobile browsers present a unimodal distribution. Can you comment quickly if you expect a difference in the results if your user is using a browser of a laptop or a smartphone?
Thank you for your question. So in this work, we only took into account measurements from desktop. So what we can say about mobile is just something inferred from our results on the desktop version. In fact, we find that among the features that can help predicting whether a page is unimodal or not, we have the number of images and the number of objects, which can help revealing whether the page is unimodal or not. So we might expect that given that mobile browsers load a more simplified version, more lightweight version of the page, we might expect that in that case we might find more unimodal pages. But this is just an expectation because we didn't take into account this case.
Sure. So thank you very much. In fact, we need to finish now. We could go on for more 1 hour at least. So thank you very much for everyone. And thanks a lot, Jim, to be able to co-chair. In fact, was really needed And so, Marco, it's up to you. Thanks a lot for contributing to this session. Thank you, everyone.
Round of applause for
Thanks, Jim and Edmundo, for managing the session, and thanks, Edmundo, for putting together the session, because this was your task, so it went very good. What I'm really pleased is that we have fairly interesting discussions in spite of the difficulties of the electronic medium. So I'm very, very happy that it seems to be working in spite of the technology.